Hey everyone, welcome to one of our lectures. And in this lecture we have a bit of a treat. I've got an interview with the very impressive Dr. John Rees, who is a lecturer at University of Notre Dame in Sydney. That's different from the University of Notre Dame in the US, but they are associated institutions. John is a researcher, and he's also going to be the next Fulbright Fellow who's going to follow me to Wyoming, so he'll have a chance to do some of his classes. John, welcome.
Thanks very much, James, and hi everyone. Looking forward to coming to Wyoming soon.
So can you just give us a bit of background about the broad area of your research? It is a combination of religious studies and also international relations around issues of globalization. So what's your latest research?
The latest research is really the role of religion as it plays out in things like religious nationalism, or the role of religion in its sort of transnational form. One of the fascinating things about religious communities is that they don't stop at the border of countries. Religious communities very often are international communities. So where do their loyalties lie? Where do their ultimate allegiances lie when they think about members of religious communities think about their primary identity? And so religion and religious people and religious organizations as political actors.
So do we get the situation where religious identity can come into conflict with political identity or citizenship? Does that happen? I mean, we hear of the Islamic nation, which is, the Islamic borders, Islamic beliefs beyond borders, and so you get, I suppose, religious sects of Islam that transcend borders, and people seem more loyal to that sect than they do to their nation state. Is that the kind of thing that plays out?
I think when we think about religion, that's partly true, but religions themselves, and this is why they're fascinating points of study, are highly adaptive and not monolithic. What I mean by that is there's not one conversation going on, say, about citizenship or about loyalty to the state within a religion. There's a complex conversation that's happening within a religion about someone's devout responsibilities to the state that they live in, or someone's devout responsibilities to their neighbour, or someone's devout responsibilities to the core doctrines and beliefs that they hold. And so within religious traditions themselves, there can be some fascinating disagreements, for example, on whether I should do what the state tells me to do, or whether my citizenship is actually not nearly as important, what's on my passport, as what's in my heart in terms of my faith. And my primary loyalty is to a deity or to a transnational community that I might have a primary allegiance to. So within the same faith, not just between faiths, and this is a really important point, I think, within the same faith, there's fascinating and complex disagreements in answer to those questions, and that's the kind of thing I like to study.
So this then takes us into, I suppose, a broader range of the topic that we've been studying, which is around religion, which is around citizenship. So how does your research on these, I suppose, religions and religious actors play out in terms of how we come to understand contemporary citizenship?
There's two manifestations of religion in relation to the state that I think create a nice contrast for us. The first we might call religious nationalism. And religious nationalism is where a single religion has some sense of privileged place within a state. And so those citizens of a state that belong to that privileged religion have a lot of access that other members of other religious communities don't.
So we would get I suppose, Hindu nationalism in places like India, and so on. Yeah.
A good example of this would be the post-communist state of Russia, and the status of the Russian Orthodox Church. There's a very close association between centralized power out of the Kremlin, and particularly under Vladimir Putin's rule, and the patriarch, the Orthodox patriarch. There seem to be partners in re-establishing the Russian state together, right? And so the other form of religious nationalism, to stay within that category, is when a religious elite themselves seek to recreate the nation in their own image. And one of the best and most powerful examples of this is the 1979 revolution in Iran, where religious elites, much to the dismay of those outside that were watching, that never thought it would be successful, religious elites end up taking over the country and end up maintaining a religion-based system that is called the Islamic Revolution in Iran.
So one of the important definitions of citizenship that we've been discussing in class, or one of the important elements, is that citizenship is access, is a sort of a reciprocated access to rights and obligations, right? So that means that if we get to the situation where it's religious-driven citizenship, that means people that don't have that religion don't have the full access to those rights. So you get that sense of exclusion. Is that I suppose the natural extension of that research?
I think it could be a natural extension of certain kinds of that first concept of religious nationalism. And a way out of it is possibly the second concept, and that is religious pluralism.
Right.
So religious pluralism is where citizens, regardless of their faith communities or none, have a legitimate place to practice their beliefs within that sort of broader sense of citizenship. It still doesn't get us out of some interesting conundrums that we like to study. For example, where there's a clash between practices of religion and what the state thinks is the common good.
Right.
And the common good and citizen participation in an agreed sense of the common good is probably where a lot of religions can meet.
Yep.
The golden rule, for example, do what you would do to your neighbour, what you would like to have done to yourself.
Yep.
is a thread through many, many different religious traditions. And so that sense of the common good and religious capabilities and religious energies and communities and resources feeding into that is one expression of religious pluralism that works well. But when we go deeper, as I said, there can be some interesting questions about religious rights if they particularly clash with broader civic rights, particularly towards minorities.
Right. Okay. So let's can we discuss a little bit about contemporary
Sure.
politics? I
Yep.
suppose how are you seeing it play out in place in pluralist societies like Australia and the US at the moment? I mean, there is I suppose always been a tension between, say, those who see the state as being purely secular and then people that see the state as, or religions having a role in identity. Things like in Australia we have, I suppose, historically being tied with Britain, the Church of England. So how does that play out in contemporary politics in places like Australia and the US?
I think it depends on what we mean by secularism. I think there are two kinds of secularism at play here. One form of secularism is the subordination of religion to a broader state-established set of rules and norms and expectations.
Yeah.
The second kind of secularism is the equality of all religions.
Right, okay.
Right? And so the Indian constitution, for example, a secular state, has a very different approach to religion, the equality of all religions, and this is where we get the ethic of religious freedom. Foundations of the United States itself have this as a central theme, religious freedom. Australia, to do some comparative politics, is very different to that. We actually don't have enshrined sense of religious freedom as explicitly stated and as a reason for the foundation of the country. You're right, James, that we actually have a pseudo-Christian origin, although certain Christian fundamentalist groups like to talk in Australia about Australia being founded as a Christian nation, but I think that idea is an import from elsewhere, including from the United States. I don't think that's necessarily true. As you know, we were a colony, mainly a penal colony, meaning that, you know, those that were sent to the far-flung reaches of the British Empire end up in Australia in prisons, and we are a convict settler society as Australia begins. In that sense, there's no giant religious project underway. It just so happens that we are the manifestation or the expression of a certain kind of imperial religion that came from Britain. But not everyone's walking around Australia in the original years saying we are a Christian nation. Right. Okay.
So I suppose one final question to wrap it up is going back to your I suppose discussion around religious pluralism and also the idea of sort of this idea of identity. I'm interested, like, there's often a tension between people see the secular state and the religion, and I think that is the tension playing out in contemporary politics. But you don't necessarily see that tension as having to be there, do you?
No, I actually think that the best step that we could take as researchers in religion is to step away from external commentaries about religion. For example, let's consider Islam. One could be an expert in Islamophobia, the way that the Islamic community is treated in a society, and that's excellent work and that needs to be done. But one could be an expert in that without actually knowing anything about the internal beliefs and debates of Islam itself. It's just the way that we study how a group is treated. Too often, that for us is considered to be the study of religion. It's not really, is it?
No.
It's the study of the way that a group is treated in society. I think a better way forward is to get inside the discussions that are happening within a religious community. So coming back to our earliest point, some of those discussions are saying we should obey the state. We should be good citizens. We should conform our beliefs to what the state wants for the sake of our children, for the sake of our neighbours, for the sake of our future. There's another voice in that same conversation from the same group of religious believers saying, no, we should think about our faith first, and then citizenship might come later in terms of a priority. What we need to do is get close to the conversations that really existing religious communities are having amongst themselves. Not simply between themselves, say the Jewish community talking to the Muslim community, but within themselves. What's the conversation happening within the Christian community? And within that, within the Pentecostal community of Christians, or within the Orthodox community of Christians, about how do we be citizens? How do we be a present, positive force for our neighbours, for our community, for our country?
And that, I suppose that one of the responses, one of the advantages of taking that approach would be to stop homogenising religions, because we often, when you're from the outside looking in, you see that religion as being a very monolithic. All the Christians will vote for this political party, or all Muslims have this attitude, and I think that's a mistake that many social commentators make.
It is, and I think that if our only source about religion are certain media outlets, regardless of where we fall on the political spectrum, if that's our only source, remember, the media discourse is going to want to find controversy, and so in that controversy, conflict, interplay, treating religions like they just believe one thing and hold one position is very valuable. But in truth, I keep coming back to this phrase, really existing religious communities don't believe one thing. There's a wild conversation going on within religious traditions, and I think we need to not overplay that if we're not familiar with those belief systems, but we need to have an ear to it and respect what voices coming out of religious communities say about the things that we're interested in: citizenship, belonging, loyalty, dissent, these very important things that make up for a rich civil society.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and I think it adds a lot to our discussion around understanding the complexities of citizenship that I've been really keen for us to discuss. Like I've always said, that we have different interpretations of citizenship, the perspective from religious scholars, and the way that religion can play both in enhancing but also undermining, I suppose, those rights and access to citizenship is really important to understand. Thanks for joining us, mate, and you will see more of John next semester. If my recommendation is get into his class, I always say that you can have me, but then you can have a real academic like John. All right, see you guys later. Bye now.